We're going to see what the on-farm application is looking like for a lot of these same principles that we've been discussing. Each one of you, your goals are a little bit different. So maybe we'll just bring you each on one at a time just to talk about what was that goal that drove you to trying this. And maybe just you could tell us in a nutshell if you felt like you achieved that goal in what you've done so far in this. And we'll start here with Joe. Joe, if you don't mind, we'll pull you up and let us know what was your goal when starting this project and what have you found so far?
So Abby's been working with me in interseeding corn for about 6 years now. And before that, I had been broadcasting cover crop, mainly rye, in corn to try to achieve a overwinter cover crop for my corn going to soybean rotation, because I love to plant my soybeans into a green cover. And as you've heard other people mention, that the narrower spacing or traditional space corn tends to shade, outcompete covers. And I was looking for more consistency. It isn't that the broadcast covers or interseeded covers didn't work. It just wasn't as consistent for the following year as I would like to see it. And so when I heard about the widening the corn rows out, I was instantly drawn to the possibility of getting a consistent overwintering cover. And then it was just basically testing it to try to still achieve corn yields that we're comfortable with as production agriculturalists. So.
And for starters, did you get that consistency through the winter?
Well, this is my first year. I shouldn't say that. I just had a plot in last year. And yes, the consistency of overwinter was very good in that versus the 30-inch rows on a plot basis last year. It was encouraging. So this year, I don't know yet because we really haven't gone through winter, but I can tell you going into winter, I have never had a consistent cover as I have right now going into winter. And it's from, edge of headland all the way across the field to the other edge of the headland. It's not in a low area or, I don't have the edges of the field missing like I normally do in a broadcast situation. So it's looking very good from a cover crop standpoint at this point.
Excellent. And Joe, were you satisfied this first time with the yield you got versus what you were expecting?
What we saw, we did see a yield reduction. And what was very interesting is the yield reduction wasn't there if the cover crops weren't there. So I got the same yield in twin row 60 or pair row 60 as I did in 30s where I compared it. Now that was a limited one field trial. But when I put the covers in, then I started pulling the yields down. As I added a little more fertilizer, then I brought that back up. So I had anywhere from 0 to a 5% reduction to a 10% reduction. But those were the extremes.
Very cool. Thank you, Joe. Let's go to Mike. Mike, it really looked like you guys were having fun out there picking all sorts of stuff. So tell us about your goals going into this project.
Well, I actually didn't have a goal. That's one aspect of it that wasn't predetermined, but on the backside, some goals where we got the family involved in a big project, taught the kids a little bit about, growing your own food. And then we actually did some farmers market stuff. We didn't actually go to a farmer's market, I guess. They just sold stuff on Facebook and then set up in town a few times. So a little business aspect in it for them, I guess, was a bonus. This was just a fun project. We weren't ever thinking about this being widespread on the farm. This isn't something we're going to try and do on large acreage. We did this on 4 acres this year, which was large enough for all hand labor, but it was fun.
And you mentioned kind of moving the garden to perhaps more of a traditional garden plot. Will you still keep some small acreage in wide row corn, you think?
Yeah, we'll keep experimenting with the 60-inch corn. But for other reasons, we'll probably move the garden out of it and just do cover crops.
Great. Let's go to Chris here. Chris, talk a little bit about your goals going into trying the wide row corn.
Sure. Good morning. My goals were originally when we started to do the 60-inch corn was to add diversity into my rotations, and then to have a grazing aspect with this corn. If we can add some biomass to go along with grazing our corn stalks, we thought that would be a great benefit for us as in our livestock. And then one of the other reasons we wanted to try this wide row corn is, we'd had limited success in our 30-inch interseeding. It seems like we're just getting too much shading for our cover crop to have any really good growth. So those are kind of the goals that we were pursuing here with trying this wide row corn this year. So.
And how did it end up working for you as far as evaluating the project?
For us, I had two trials. I had one, I did some strips out in the middle of a 30-inch conventional field, and there we saw about a 15% yield reduction. And then I got another chunk south of my yard. It's a little 30-acre chunk that we've done a lot of heavy feeding on in the wintertime, and then it's just been corn on corn on corn for many years. And there I was really happy. I got both places. I had pretty good cover crop establishment and growth. Where I had my trial within my 30-inch corn, there I think I had a little bit of during the rounds got a little longer. It seemed like my cover crop seed bridge into my box got a little lighter in the middle of the field, but on the ends I had really good cover crop growth and establishment. And then south of my yard I had a really good established cover crop, and it stayed pretty clean for me. And there, my corn there, I just combined a couple of test strips in the middle there, and it was running about 150 to 60 bushels, where I combined a couple strips. And so with that, I was really happy because it's a poor field, very sandy, light organic matter field. So with that yield, I'm actually fairly satisfied there with that. So and I'm really happy with the cover crop growth now. We haven't started grazing there yet. I planned for a winter graze on it, and we'll probably start grazing that here in about 2 more weeks. I think I'm guessing we'll get to it. So.
And did you select your cover crop for grazing quality, or what did you end up using?
Yeah, we did a little bit of selection there for grazing purposes. I did stick with primarily cool season stuffs because I wanted it to stay green going into fall. But I would say, now the things that turned up late in the year, we had our sun hemp and our buckwheats that flowered and then kind of died off. But and then we had a crimson clover that kind of died off. But then we had our ryegrass and some of our brassicas that stayed green and really did some really good growth here once the corn dried down and got a little even more sunlight in there. So I'm pretty happy with the biomass that's there, and I think it's going to work out pretty well for grazing. Even now that's even getting later, that it's frosted down some, but it's still fairly green yet, and it's going to be good. I think it's going to work out pretty well.
Let's go to Tyler. Tyler, talk to us about your goals.
Well, I guess initially, kind of the same thing. I didn't exactly know where my goals were at, other than I love the fact of having cover crops growing in my cash crops, just like the sunflower ordeal. If you can give a cash crop grow or cover crops growing full season and still have a cover crop out there, I just think it's a win in all different aspects with the biology and stuff in the soil. The other goal on the side of it is I'm integrating livestock into my system. Most of the livestock are actually Chris Walberg's there. We work together on a lot of that. So we're bringing livestock on. So if we can add to the biomass out there other than just corn stalks, that's another goal. If we can make that happen, it probably is not going to exactly happen the way we wanted it to, because the yield goal right now, you'll hit 15%. That's we can't make that up with custom grazing, obviously, but I think we'll keep trying and keep experimenting and see if we can bring that yield percentage a little closer, where the livestock and just the soil health part of it, we can benefit the rest of the hit, I guess.
Joe, let's go back to you. I want to maybe throw a two-part question at you. You talked about in the video about kind of harvestability and how you're kind of adjusting your harvest to fit the needs of this system. But then also I want you to touch on fertilizer a little bit too. You mentioned it in your first answer about fertilizer, and maybe you could just kind of hit both of those points.
Yeah. Well, first off, I can hit the harvestability part pretty quickly here. It was awesome. It harvested great. The 6-inch row spacing was what I planted on most of the farm, and but whether it was 6 or 8 or 4, the harvestability of all those rows, or of that 64,000 plant population in those 2 rows coming into 1 row, was fantastic. So I have almost zero concern about that going into the future. We were harvesting at over 5 miles an hour with almost 0 header loss in very dry corn. So in those extreme conditions, satisfied. The fertility side, I do believe that from what I have seen, and it sort of makes sense, when you allow all that space in between those corn rows, the corn is probably not efficiently exploring that whole space. So to concentrate the fertilizer near the corn row is probably going to be necessary to try to maximize that yield. And, you know, there again becomes a systems thing where you have to make that work out with your own equipment and how you're going to do it. And I haven't fully decided, but I'm exploring what I'm going to do for next year now.
And there is a question specifically on the twin row work. Were there areas of short corn or low ears that were difficult to harvest? It sounds like no.
I did not see that this year at all. The corn stood up pretty well, but even okay, so everybody's got some salt spots and some areas leading into porous soils where the corn was shorter. The one thing I did do is when I was talking about corn hybrids, I specifically asked for corn that had higher than average ear placement, just for that reason. I would not want to have corn where the ears were, you know, literally touching the ground. That probably would not be good. What I saw with corn, if I did have a few breakover, they picked up very well. So from that standpoint, I felt good about it. But yeah, I think probably ear placement would be good to look at as you're picking corn varieties.
And what timing worked best for you, Joe, as far as planting these cover crops?
So we were planting corn in early to mid-May, and then we planted our cover crops from early to mid-June. The corn was about 4 to 5 leaf stage, mostly 4 probably. The one thing I probably will look at a little closer next year and that I will test is cover crop mixtures and maybe planting timing. But again, like Kelly was alluding to, planting timing is dangerous because if you don't plant when you have that window of opportunity, you might miss it. So I think I'll tend to lean more towards maybe I'll pull some of the cool season grasses out of my mix. Or reduce them significantly. The oats did really well coming out of the gate this spring, and it could have used more N than I really would like it to. I mean, the soil health aspects of it, I think, are wonderful growing in there. But if we're going to try to figure out where, when you add covers and if it's taking yield, we need to start playing with those concoctions and see if we can achieve the soil health and the soil cover that we want for weed control with less yield compromise is the direction I'm going to experiment with.
A couple great questions here from the Q&A. I think I'll direct these maybe to Chris for starters. Chris, how do you look at how well the grazing offsets any yield loss you might experience in corn? You know, how do you value the grazing aspect of what you're doing? And have you tried a cost share? I'm wondering if maybe you and Tyler have tried some sort of cost share with livestock and grazing elsewhere.
Yeah. As far as the grazing aspect of it, you know, like, you know, the south of my yard here, I left the corn standing. So, you know, I got the the value of the corn. So I'm hoping that what I plan on putting on there is some cull cows, and hopefully I'll get some good weight gains on there. When I have if you're feeding a cull cow in a lot, it's maybe cost up towards $2.50 to $3 a day with the amount of corn they eat. Here, I'm hoping that I can reduce that cost some. The other thing is, I am saving my harvest cost with a combine as well. So, there's a lot of factors to kind of enter into that. And, as far as hard numbers, I won't really have a better grasp until I, actually start grazing the stuff with the actual standing corn to see, how much weight actually these cows put on and how well they do. So, it's kind of a little bit to be determined for me, the financial aspect of it that way. This is the first year that I've grazed with Tyler. We had another neighbor that grazed with Tyler last year, but I guess we just kind of, so far on that, grazing a cover crop with livestock, we're just doing so many cents per head per day.
And Tyler, is that how you did that with the other cattle producer you're working with?
Yes, we've just kind of, I kind of go off of what I can get the knowledge from Chris on what things are worth. We've actually had a full season cover crop on another section of field that we left, planted a whole full season cover crop and grazed that off. The actual 60-inch corn plot, that'll the cows will get moved on here probably in the next week or so. He's got it fenced off. He's going to go up there, and yeah, we just kind of run a per day, so many per head, and just kind of seeing where we can make it work. I want it to be beneficial for the cattle rancher so that he comes back next year. I want the cattle out there. So whatever, if we can plant corn and have a better cover crop that these ranchers want to be there, then we can probably start talking a little bit more of the financial side of what I can gain from them. But in my terms right now is I want to see the integration of livestock on my land. So I think the rates right now are probably, we're going to stay very reasonable for my rancher guys and see how we can work into it down the road and see what happens.
Well, Mike, I want to get back to you with all of these, this garden that you planted in the midst of this corn. How did you do that? Just logistically, from a logistical standpoint, what was your timing like?
Well, we planted the garden about like we planted the cover crop in the corn. So we did it the first part of June. We were dry also, we're not far from Mike Osley. So we a lot of those seeds didn't want to be planted very deep. A lot of the recommendations was a 1/4 inch. Well, we didn't have any way to germinate a seed at a 1/4 inch, but we did them shallow. We caught a little shot of rain, got some of them going. Some of them, I think, died after that, but some of the stuff probably should have been in sooner, but really maximize it. But it was all for fun.
I've got another question from the audience. I'll direct this one to Joe. Did you have any difficulty reaching your desired populations in this system?
No. When I was designing a planter frame so that I could go to a 2-rank planter system, we purchased precision planter units, row units. So planting the corn was actually very, very good, and desired population was, I had as good a stand as I've ever had probably. So no, had a good stand.
And to Tyler, let's go back to you. So there's a question about crop insurance in wide rows, and in doing this, I know you just had trial plots, so I don't know if you necessarily had to go through this, but what would be the difficulties or issues that you come up against with crop insurance for wide row corn?
Well, actually, obviously just being a plot like that, we really didn't go out and see what the crop insurance would be. My brother actually is in the crop insurance business. I actually talked to him after the fact, and he kind of just made it the fact that, we're still planting the same amount of corn out there. Granted, the rows are different, the spacing's different. There's not really a crop insurance delay or anything for planting wide rows. I mean, it's just, we're still planting the same amount of seeds out there. We're still planting it to harvest and everything else. So realistically, I don't believe there's going to be a big issue with crop insurance going down the road.
Yeah, that's good. And I maybe we'll ask Joe that same question since you had a few more acres of wide row corn on your farm. Did you have those conversations with your crop insurance or navigate that system in any way?
Yeah, yes, I did, Abby. And I actually at one point just decided to say, okay, here's what I'm doing. Full disclosure, send an adjuster out if you want to take a look at it and tell me what you think. And actually they did. And the adjuster was comfortable with what I was doing. Now, in the case of the pear row, he actually was like, well, you have the same amount of rows, you just moved them together a little bit. So would he have been uncomfortable if I would have had single row 60? I'm guessing, like Tyler said, probably not, as long as the population was there. So I can't speak for all or any insurance companies when it comes to insuring wide space corn. But I guess I don't feel like I compromised myself in any way doing it with my insurance company.
And Mike, back to you if I could. I asked you about kind of timing, but I didn't ask you about how you selected the cover crops you did to go into your system. What did you select and how did that go?
Well, are you talking about on the rest of it where we just did cover crops?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can go there. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I actually worked with Abby a little bit. She had a couple of mixes that we wanted to try, more of a low input mix versus a little bit more higher input mix. My project failed completely. We were super wet in the spring and we weren't able to plant where we wanted to. So I have almost no useful data whatsoever. If it could go wrong, it did. So I don't know how much farther you want me to go on that.
Yeah, I think you had some thoughts too when we were talking on our planning Zoom call. Mike, you had some thoughts on shade tolerance of different cover crops or things like that too that you might be willing to try in the future, or maybe when there's a better year for planting and for corn in your area. Do you want to share some of those thoughts on cover crops that you might want to use in the future, or how you'd integrate those in your system?
Sure. Well, I've done a lot of rye and annual ryegrass, and I really like annual ryegrass. My future for wide row corn is next year to do annual ryegrass in it, and that being the only cover crop that I put in there. And that's mostly setting up for the next year, is using that as a grazing pasture right away in the spring. So that's a little different. I don't so much want to plan use for it for next year, but the year after.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You've had great success in grazing that annual ryegrass, and that was also a component in Chris's mix as well. So that seems to be a good fit when you've got some livestock to graze it, and it seems to do pretty well in that system. Now we've got a couple more questions here on corn chopping, and
yeah, I don't know, Chris, if this may be asking you to speculate a little bit, but I'll read you the question and see if maybe, see what you think. It says, would the cover crop affect corn chopping equipment? Is that something you have any experience with or could speak to your thoughts on?
Nothing seems really, at least in my mix, I didn't have anything that was super viney of that sort. So I don't think a person would have any issue, going with like like a Kemper type style head. And I don't know, a lot of guys, if you're chopping yourselves, maybe have a 2-row head. Maybe a guy would just do your paired 30s with a 60-inch gap in between them, and then so you have your 2 rows that are set up for your head already. I guess that's maybe a way I would go if I had a 2-row chopping head versus the 60s all the way across the field. But I think with a Kemper style head, I don't think a person would have any trouble chopping.
Maybe sticking on the harvest aspect, I think we asked Joe about his harvest of the 60-inch spacing, but we didn't ask anybody else about how that went. So maybe let's go back to, or maybe we'll stick with Chris. Let's see what your experience was in that field where you had the plot of 60-inch versus your 30. How did your harvest go?
I didn't really have any harvest issues. I did have to slow down about a mile an hour. Normally we combine about 4.5, and I had to slow down to about 3.25 to 3.5. But I didn't notice, other than having to slow down for the extra rows coming in there, I didn't notice any extra head drop or anything like that. It seemed like a combine good. I just needed to slow down a little bit in my case. So no major issues, just had to slow down.
Yeah. And how was your experience, Tyler?
Actually, it went fair. We did have to slow down. It just seemed like it didn't, all the corn mass didn't feed into the header really well. We didn't have any header loss. The cover crop was nothing. I mean, most of the cover crop by that time had kind of wilted over. So the cover crop didn't bother the combine aspect of it at all. But I did have to slow down. It just seemed like I couldn't get it to feed into the header the way where Nick normally did. I guess that was my only issue.
And I think we can ask Mike the same question as to how is your vegetable pickers? How is their harvestability? How did they do? And then also when you did go to harvest that field, how did it go for you?
All our vegetable pickers, they had good harvestability. They were able to get right down there. My corn ended up yielding about 40 bushel less than the rest of the corn that we had in on the farm. But harvestability was fine. You know, I would say we slowed down a little bit too, just to give everything time to feed in so that nothing went flying.
And Chris, we have a question here on weed management. You know, what did you see in terms of weed management in your system?
My experience, I had pretty clean fields, and I tell you what I did. I planted my corn as a little later, as the 20th of May, and then we did a Roundup 2,4-D burn down, and then I come back with I had a really heavy flush of weeds coming. It was, you know, almost to the point of getting lush green with a second weed flush after that. So then we came back with a Lotus atrazine Roundup mix, and then we planted that was about the 20th of June, and then we seeded our cover crop about the 30th of June, about 10 days after that second application. And I think between that second application and just having a really good establishment, we just didn't have the weed problems. Now, listening to the panel earlier, I am a little concerned about my buckwheat carrying over and becoming a weed this coming year. But I guess, you know, we'll see. We'll have to handle that as it comes. But as far as this year, you know, I think it was just a combination of you know, probably the timing of my second application, and then just having a good establishment to compete with the weeds that kept my 60-inch corn. I was really surprised. It was cleaner than I thought it would be.
And did you notice the weeds any worse in areas where the covers didn't take as well?
Yeah. So in our field where we had a couple strips right in the middle of a conventional 30-inch field there, like I said, in the middle of the field, I think maybe my drill box bridged on me a little bit, and my cover crop got a little lighter throughout kind of in the middle of the field. And there I did have, you could definitely notice more weed pressure there where the cover crop was thinner. And I assume that it was just the lack of cover crop competition. So the weeds had more opening to grow. So
well, want to give everybody a chance for some final thoughts as we get closer to rounding out this panel. And Joe, maybe we'll start with you. Anything that we discussed here that you wanted to either add on to or emphasize, or anything new you wanted to bring to the panel while you have the floor?
Well, we covered a lot. I guess just to round it up, herbicide issues for me, I used a very similar program that Chris did, and where there was cover crop, I had very few weed problems. Where the cover crop, either because I didn't plant it or for some reason it wasn't as good, you could definitely see it. Maybe the same number of weeds in there, but certainly if the cover crop wasn't there competing with it, it was allowed to express itself for definitely more seed production. And the weeds that I had would mainly have been water hemp in my situation that came through the cover crop or grew with the cover crop. You know, other than that, I was so surprised about the harvestees. I really like that part of it. We're extremely comfortable for next year going in with that. And now it's just working on those little details to try to maximize the yield for this coming year. And we'll need to have more discussions on this topic as we get closer.
Joe, we do have a question from the audience on radishes, and I know you've grown radishes. Have you seen any 2,4-D residual or suppression on radishes at all?
I have not. I did not have radish in my cover crop mix in my wide space corn because I have brassicas in a crop rotation. I did not put brassicas in my cover crop mix, but I do have experience with 2,4-D and brassicas, and very little. I would say if you are doing a 2,4-D burn down or have 2,4-D in with your corn herbicide program, and you're allowing that week between spraying and seeding, I would not worry about the brassicas and a 2,4-D.
Thank you so much, Joe. Let's go to Mike for a final word. Mike, anything you want to add to the panel or emphasize that we've discussed?
Yeah, well, one thing that I found interesting out of the garden part of the experiment that could maybe be taken into the farming part of it was that even though we had our rows 60 inches apart, there was still enough shade to actually affect the development of some of the vegetables and stuff that we planted. That, in my mind, that makes me think that we could maybe even go wider. I think it was maybe Kelly Cooper earlier, they were measuring stalks and finding that there was no different in the stalk size yet, being that close together in 60 inch that, I don't know how much wider or how much more you could crowd them before you would start to see something. But maybe there's still more sunlight to catch, and maybe we could even go bigger.
Let's go to Chris for a final word.
Yeah, so back to that brassica 2,4-D issue. I've had that problem. I've done a 2,4-D burn down and then seeded a cover crop, not in corn, but just a cover crop in general. And yeah, it's smoked almost all my brassicas. So I would highly recommend waiting that 7 to 10 days after a 2,4-D application. Far as final words, another issue that I've seen is emergence. I think it's even more critical than even in 30 is that in my single row 60s that we have even emergence. And there's places in the field where we had more trash or whatever, and the emergence wasn't as even. And those plants that came up later definitely just did not compete at all. They were just a weed. So I think, if a person's going to try it on a trial, to do the best thing you can to get even emergence and good soil contact. The other things we're thinking about for next year is maybe, if we're going to graze it again, we might try some longer maturing corn. That we don't really care if it, gets dry enough for harvesting if we're going to graze it. So maybe we could gain a little yield that way. If I had the ability, I think maybe the pair row would help to overcome some of our yield loss as well. Then the other thing we're looking at is maybe our population, play with populations a little bit, a little higher, a little lower, and see what happens there. And then if we can get our fertilizer a little better banded on our rows, I think is like Joe Breker alluded to earlier. But right now, like in our field trial there with a 15% yield hit, we got to keep our trials small. We can't overcome that economic loss. So just keep playing with it and see where we can go. I know Lee Breeze had a good comment there too about maybe, relegating it to our maybe not as profitable acres or poor acres and integrating livestock. And that's kind of the avenue I think that maybe we'll pursue too as well. I think that's a good thought as well to try this wide row corn on it. So that's my final thoughts.
And Tyler, you get the last word here.
I guess one thing on the weed thing is, and I think they've touched on it before, but let's make sure that we do take care of our weeds in front of our cover crops. Make sure we do your best chemical program. Most of the cover crops that I've seen, they seem like they grow through just about anything. I mean, you may have some cover crops that are weak up front, but throughout the season, it seems like they overcome most any chemical out there. So let's make sure we do a good job of chemical program first, because I had some issues with weeds. I in my 60-inch corn plot this year, I think of my timing. I wanted to get the cover crop out there because it was the timing. The corn was growing really fast, and we just decided to go out there and seed it. A few of the weeds came up shortly after, and we did have some weed issues because I was concentrating more on cover crops in the 60-inch than I probably should have been thinking about my chemical program. So just always keep, we got to raise the corn crop first. I guess the other aspect to close out with is the 60-inch corn is I want a cover crop out there. That's my main goal, because just I think Tony Wagner talked about yesterday, every crop after his cover crop is better. And I think if we can do that with this corn, so maybe we will have a yield hit this year, but how much better is our corn crop going to be next year, or our bean crop? Or, are we bettering the soil that much more by adding all this diversity out there, getting the biology going? Maybe if you're a new to no-till, this would be a great kind of a gateway aspect of maybe getting into no-till with planting corn, and then being able to plant cover crops out there to help you jumpstart the whole system. So I think there's a lot of different aspects that I can look at why we want to do 60-inch corn or cover crops in all, I guess. So
Such a strong ending there, Tyler. Thank you very, very much to all four of you. That was great. Really appreciate the panel in general.